Hi guys, this is Nadia from Mbali Crafts, and today I want to show you how to make this sunburst style design. If you enjoy my videos, consider subscribing because I upload new ones every week. So let's get started. So to begin with, we're going to wrap our weaving wire 5 times around our base wire. And then we're going to bring in the next base wire, and we are going to wrap our weaving wire around the next base wire 1 full revolution before bringing it back from behind up towards the top again, and then adding in our next weaving wire. So this is just to start adding in the weave. So we're going to continue and we're going to repeat the same process as before. So we're going to wrap around the base wire once, and we're going from behind up over the top, and then we're going to bring in the next base wire, and we are going to repeat this. So we're going to go around once, full revolution around it, underneath from behind and back over the top. Now for the last wire, we are not going to wrap around either side because obviously this is the tip. So we're only going to go around the top wire without wrapping, and then we are going to come from underneath and we are coming up and in between wire 3 and 4 before then coming back from underneath and behind and coming in between wire 3 and 4 and wrapping around wire 3 like so. You can see me holding my finger at the back of the weave to keep it in place. That helps with neatness. And then we are going to continue with this. We're now going to come in between wire 1 and 2, wrapping around wire 2 once, and don't forget the 2 wires, and then we are going to start afresh by starting with our 5 loops in between each pyramid. So I'm going to repeat this whole procedure with all the wires attached now. It's basically the exact same. So we're going to wrap around the first base wire 5 times, like so. And then we're going to step up to wire 2 and wrap around this 1 full revolution until we are at the back of the weave again. And then from behind we are going to step it up to wire 3. Wrap it around wire 3 in 1 full revolution, again coming from behind, wrapping from behind across all of the wires and then stepping it up. Now you see me here using pliers, and that's because this weave is quite untidy to start with. Flattening it and pressing it together will actually really help keep it tidy. So we're going across all of the wires when we get to the top, so no little loop required. When we get to the other side, as I said earlier, we do the little loop first. So we wrap around wire 4 once before coming across all of the wires and then moving back down to wire 3. 1 revolution around wire 3 before coming around all 3 wires and then stepping down in between wire 3 and 2. Wrap around wire 2 once, like so, and then wrapping around wire 1 and 2 before stepping it all the way back down to wire 1 and then starting afresh with your 5 wraps, and then that's the wrap completed. Now once again, as I said, you need to work on the tidiness, because if you don't spend time on that, it can look untidy. So it's quite important, I found personally, to press this weave as you go along. So you use your pliers to compress the weave, and that gets rid of any unevenness. And with this weave, it's quite easy to hide the little loop. So that's quite an important aspect. So next, bring in your stone. So my stone is about 20 by 15 millimeters. Obviously it just depends what size you've got. You can sort of reference the weave against the stone. It should only be a slightly larger than the stone, just depending on how you want it to sit. So just see what you've got and make sure that the weave fits around the stone. So next we need to remove all the base wires because we want to show the weave, the zigzag, and the way to do that is by pulling the base wires out of the weave. Now obviously the further down you get, the harder it becomes, there's more friction, so then you can trim off in the middle. Obviously try and avoid that because you can reuse the wires, so the less you cut the better. So just try and cut as little as possible, but as you get down to the last one, it's impossible. So you just need to trim it and pull it out. Otherwise, you're just going to distort your weave, and that's what it looks like so far. So quite a pretty weave, and you can do this with any type of weave really, and just try and see what it looks like. There's many different ways of weaving, and it's actually quite pretty. So next, we're going to shape the wires that we have by hand. You can use a mandrel if you want to. I always try and shape by hand. It's just the way I do things. Obviously everybody has got their own style and way of doing things, so depends on you. So just gently shape it, and the more time you take to do this, the more likely it is that the shape you're creating is actually symmetrical and straight. So there are no funny kinks in the wire. You just take your time with it, and then you can guide the wire better. So we're just going to meet up the ends of the weave on either side like so, and then we're going to reference back against the stone. Now my stone, the holes unfortunately are quite small, so I could only fit one wire through, but you can do two if your stone's big enough. So here we go. So I'm feeding one wire through. I've trimmed the other one off. Obviously, if you've got two, the more wire you fit through, the better, obviously, for strength and integrity. So if you can put through two, then do that. So next, we're going to tie the stone in place. And the way we do that is by attaching the weaving wire coming through the stone to the innermost wire on the right once. So just make sure you pull that nice and tight. Obviously be careful not to snap the point for wire because it's quite fine, so be gentle with that. Happened to me before plenty times. So wrap it around once, and then we are going to push down the weave with our pliers. I always try and do this at this stage especially because it's quite loose, there's nothing holding it in place. And then we're going to wrap around the two wires once all together, and we are going to then bring the weaving wire around the outermost wire once. It's quite a simple weave. So this is the bale weave that you see here on the right. I'm going to go into more detail again later on. It's the same weave that we're going to apply to create the actual bale. We're just trying to close off the gap to get to the top. So shape your wires around the stone so that there's a continuation between the Sunburst design and the actual wire to the top after the point of connection. So we're then going to shape to make sure that they are crossing or meeting up at the same point before we're going to continue with the weave. So kind of line them up like that so that they are parallel, and then once you've done that, you have an idea of how much of the weaving you have to do. Now it's quite flimsy at this stage, so we're going to move over to the other side, and I'm going to wrap around both wires once before coming in between the two left-hand wires and wrapping my weaving wire around the outermost wire once, then wrapping my weaving wire around the innermost wire once, and then I'm crossing over. Before I do that, I push down the weaves, and then I'm going to cross over to the other side, wrap my weaving wire around both wires once before going in between those two wires and wrapping around the outermost wire once, and then wrapping around the innermost wire and then crossing back over. So it's basically like a zigzag pattern, and this kind of makes the two wires on each side stand out because the sort of crossing pattern is hidden from behind. So you can see how I'm doing this here. So it's a repetition of the same pattern, and you just continue until you get to the top, always pushing down with your pliers. And that's kind of what it looks like when you get to the top section. And now what we need to do is kind of join these wires together. So all I'm doing here is a short section of a block weave, which you can see in the inset on the left here. So it's basically once around each wire on your way down, and then once around 2 wires at a time on your way back up, and then you repeat this for about 2 or 3 rows. And this really is just to combine and join all of those wires together at the top. So you see me here going around each wire once on my way down, and I always use my pliers, and I cannot recommend bent nose pliers highly enough. They are so useful for so many things. So if you don't have a pair, I'd highly recommend you getting one, because it really helps. You can see here how I can push the weaves down, and the sort of nose of the plier is completely out of the way, so it's really useful. So now time to make the bail. So we're going to shape the 2 wires on the outside. So that's what it looks like so far. So now we need to create the initial shape of the bail. So if you don't do this at the beginning, it's not possible to do it after, because obviously the weaving wires will keep it in place. So you need to make sure that the shape is right before you start weaving. So keep adjusting it until you're satisfied that they sit properly side by side. It takes a bit of fiddling sometimes. And then once you're happy with the shape, we need to then bend the uppermost wires back up. So you can also use a Koki pen to mark it if you wanted to, but I just use a kind of guesstimate and put a bend in the wire where I want to create the bend. Just make sure that the wires are parallel. That's what it looks like so far. So now we can start with the weaving. So we're going to separate these out a little bit, and then we're going to begin. So it's the same sort of modus operandi for this weave. So we're going to go once around the outermost wire once, like that. And then we're going to go across the other side, and we're going to wrap around both of the wires on the right hand side once, before coming in between the 2 wires and wrapping around the outermost wire once, coming in between the 2 wires and wrapping around the innermost wire, and then we're going to go across the gap again and once around both wires, in between those 2 wires and wrap around the outermost, and then we are wrapping around the innermost wire, and then we're crossing the gap. So this is basically the pattern. You're just going to repeat this until you get to the top. So once again, it is around the innermost wire, cross the gap, and make sure you pull the wire nice and tight as you go to keep the bail neat and tidy looking. It's not an important aspect. Sometimes when you have wire that's a little bit kinked, it can create an uneven sort of look. And always sort of every 2 or 3 wraps, I tend to push down my weaves to make it look tidy. So just continue until we get to the top. So just showing you here briefly, when you do get to the sort of receding side of things, you will need to help to keep the wires in place. When you're weaving here, you can see me holding the weave in place as I create the next loop. And this is so that the weave doesn't slide up towards the tip, which it has a tendency to do. And then what happens is the weave becomes uneven, and you start pulling on the weave, which in turn will cross the sort of base wires together, and then you're going to have a hard time to keep the shape of the bail. So try when you're doing this weave to keep the sort of weaves sitting closer to each other, so that this doesn't happen. So that's that. So once we get to the top, we're going to repeat exactly what we did before, and we're going to create a block weave. And as always, take your pliers to push the weaves together to make sure it looks neat and tidy. So next we're going to repeat exactly what we did before, is going around each of the base wires once on your way down, and then as you travel back up, we're going to go around 2 wires in one go, and then we're going to repeat the process when we go on the way back down. You need to do this about 2 or 3 times to start with. So that's that, and you can go a little bit longer here. I've got about 5 sets of the block weave to extend the bail a little bit, which is quite handy. If you've made your bail too short, you can extend the weave to make it a little bit longer, and that's what it looks like. So next we need to shape the bail. Again, you can use a tool for that. Anything that's sort of got like a round shape you can use. I always go with my fingers, my hands. And we're going to take the legs and feed it through. So these are the 2 outermost legs. We're going to go through the center and push the weave, the bail weave, to the frame as close as possible. And then we're going to wrap the 2 legs around the frame on the outside about once or twice. That's what it looks like. So I've decided to go with twice because it kind of looks a little bit more symmetrical with 2 wraps rather than just 1. So once you've done that, just to keep adjusting until you're satisfied, and then trim off the wire towards the center of the pendant, because that makes sure that you can bend the little tail out of the way so it doesn't snag on any clothing. So just going to press down with your pliers like so. It can be a little bit tricky. Just make sure you don't sort of damage the sunburst design while doing this. Just take your time, and that's what it looks like so far from the back. Nice design with a sunburst. So next we need to create the little details. This is what it looks like from the back. You can have a look at the little inset on the left there, what I'm doing with the wires. Again, this is an organic design, so if you like to do something different, that's entirely up to you. You can do that. So just twist, and we're coming back to the front with those 2 wires. So try and be as symmetrical as possible. You can always use a pair of pliers to readjust. So then coming over towards the front, and we are shaping it so that the 2 wires meet up at the front. Now you don't have to do this. You can just trim the wires off at the stage where you've attached the bail. I just wanted to go and add a little bit of detail to the front. So next we now need to weave these 2 together, these 2 wires. So you can see on the top left, this is a very simple figure of 8 weave, which is once around the wire on the left. Then we are crossing over to go to the other side and make sure that you're coming from the opposing direction to kind of make it look like a figure of 8. So if you've come from underneath the left wire, make sure you go over the top when you go to the right, and so forth, and you just keep zigzagging back and forth. Now just make sure that you have 1 full revolution around each wire, because if you don't do that, the figure of 8 weave tends to be quite loose, because obviously if you don't have a full wrap, there's nothing for the wire to hold on to. So just wrap once before crossing over again, and just continue this for about sort of 7 or 8 wraps. Again, personal preference, how much of the weave you want to show, and just continue with this until you're satisfied. Can be quite a bit fiddly at this stage, but once the wires are tied in place, it will become much more stable. So next it's time to create a little detail. So again, this is organic. Obviously yours will look slightly different from mine. I just kind of decided where I wanted to place the wires and did something with it. So going to have to trim off, leave a little bit of a tail. I think my tail is about 3 centimeters or so. It just depends how long or how big you want the swirl to be. So you have to decide. It's actually more like 2. Can't really tell anymore from the picture. So I think it's about 2.5 centimeters. Trim it off, and then I'm doing the little swirl at the end. Now if you want to have a little bit of a point to the wire at the end, what I tend to do is I squeeze the tip of the wire with my round nose pliers and kind of roll my round nose pliers down as I twist. And what that does, it compresses the wire and it creates a little tip so that it doesn't have such a square edge appearance when you trim off your wires. You can see in the inset there that they are a little bit sort of thinned out towards the end, which is usually what you want when you, well, I like the look of that. So you can do that if you want. And then obviously just keep adjusting until you're satisfied with the way it looks. And you can hammer the ends if you want to as well to make them flat, entirely up to you. So next going to do the other side, same process. So going to do a bit of swirl. If you want to put a swirl in a certain place, put your thumb over it and that will help you shape it. So next we need to join these two together as well. You don't want them to get stuck on any clothing. So once again, it's a figure of 8 weave. You can see at the little inset, which is the same weave that we did in the beginning when we joined the 2 wires coming from the back. So at this stage, it's a little bit fiddly once again because you've got small sections of wire and they're hard to reach. So just take your time with that. The useful thing is with the pear is because it's drilled, it kind of moves and gives you a bit more space. It would be much harder if you had a fixed cabochon. So that's what it looks like so far. So next we are going to reuse the very same wire that we have attached to the frame. We're going to feed this through to the back of the frame for now, and we're going to bring it back up through the bail. So from the back, once you've brought it up, we are going to feed it through the front of the bail. That's what it looks like. I do it this way because there are less places for wire to having to be threaded in, less opportunities to get hooked on something. So wherever I can, I reuse weaving wire in my designs. Now obviously, as I said, everybody does it differently. So add your bead, and once you're satisfied with that, we're going to go back to the front and we're going to reuse once again the same wire. Pull your wire through the bail, and then it's time to add your beads, and then you're done. So that's that. I hope you enjoyed watching this tutorial. Thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe because I upload new videos every week. We do have a little Facebook group if you want to join into our crafty fun. It's called Wire Wrap and Jewelry Artists Worldwide. We're a fun bunch. We always have little challenges going, and it's a fantastic little community. I do sell wire, square wire tutorials and workshops on my website, as well as my pieces. So if you want to go and take a look, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram or TikTok under Imbali Crafts. And yeah, that's that. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope to see you very soon.